Thank you. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Fireside Chat with Shanae Sifrit. Shh. Welcome. There we are. Skip one. Perfect. Shanae is the senior lead of global brand strategy at Pinterest. A new out-of-home client, but has fast become one of the more innovative clients in our space. So really excited to have this conversation with Shanae. Also, I'd like to point out that Bob and Clear Channel got their video played twice, so we'll be looking for another play. So Shanae, let's start with just if you could introduce yourself, and obviously I think everyone is familiar with Pinterest, but people have different relationships with it, so maybe you could talk about what's happening in 2022, headed into 2023 at Pinterest.
Yeah, so super excited to be here, especially because Pinterest is fairly new to the out-of-home space. So I lead our global brand marketing campaigns, so that's in the US, the UK, in Germany, France, Latin America, and Japan. And we're fairly new. So I brought some slides to show how we've showed up in the market in the last 2.5 years. I like to say we're a toddler in the integrated marketing space. So if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is our first big scale campaign in 2021 called You Might Surprise Yourself. So when we think of out of home for Pinterest, it's not about unaided awareness because most people know what Pinterest is. It's just how do we introduce the use of Pinterest in a different way. So this was us in 2021. If you go to the next slide. This is more of us. This is us in UK in 2021 with a campaign called You Might Just Surprise Yourself. And it's really about the journey to Pinterest and how you might come for one thing. Like most people know us for weddings or other large life events, like maybe you just got your first apartment or you just got a new home. A lot of people use us for holiday decorations, but you can also use us for day-to-day stuff like planning a really nice meal or planning a girls' night or figuring out what you want to wear. So if we go to the next slide. This was us in 2022, so we just wrapped a campaign called Don't Yourself. It was really about getting past all of the saboteurs in our life that stopped us from trying new things. And again, this was a global campaign. It was an integrated campaign, so if you go to the next slide, I will show you how our film and out-of-home, how our film and television spot translated to out-of-home. Should be able to click, maybe. Okay, maybe not, so maybe no video, but it was a really great commercial, and hopefully you all had seen it, but it was basically about how we block ourselves from trying really interesting things, and this was the station takeover that we did in Penn Station that was really about introducing new ways for people to use Pinterest.
That's great, and I have some good news for you. When we were prepping for this, we talked about the growing importance for our out-of-home to Pinterest. So can you talk a little bit about how you think about the media mix? And I know the video was sort of how it all integrates together, but maybe you could speak to the media mix and what you've seen that makes out-of-home more important to you in the future.
Yeah, so we're in an interesting space because as a social media platform, people buy media on us. So trying to figure out what's the right media mix for Pinterest. So when we think about our online video and our commercial campaigns, we also want to think about how do we put ourselves in the contextual places that people might figure out a new way to use Pinterest. So we use out-of-home to, we talk about use cases. How do we show the way that you can use out-of-home to find a makeup look? How do we show a way that you can use out-of-home to figure out your next tattoo? So we put our out-of-home stuff, we try to make it as contextually relevant as possible. So we'll put a fashion spot in Times Square, or we'll put we'll try to put a spot about dinner near a grocery store. So really when we think about out of home is how do we make it contextually relevant where people would actually use our platform.
So when you think about that as sort of an omni-channel approach, and you've got a complex job because it's different cultures, different countries. So when you think about omni-channel, how crucial is keeping that story united? And I will say I saw some of your creative on the way down here, and it catches your eye, and you know immediately that it's Pinterest because you've seen it in other places, and it sort of tells a story across medium. So is that on purpose? How do you think about that, and how does your team think that through?
Yeah, we start with one concept. So our global team is fairly tiny, but we start with one concept and we figure out how do we translate it and make it culturally relevant to the places that we're going to be in. For us, inclusion and diversity is very, very important. So we have filters on our app where you can search for a hairstyle and you can search by your hair texture, or you can search for a beauty look and you can search by your skin tone. So we use the ways that we build our platform to also think about how are we going and making sure that we're inclusive in our out of home. So a story that may make sense in the US may not make sense in Germany, not just because of the language barrier, but because they think about things differently.
Very interesting. You know, when I look around the room, there's a lot of people that I know from not out of home, right? The last 5 years, a lot of people have realized what's happening here in the Renaissance and out of home, pandemic aside, and people have come from digital and broadcast and other places into out of home. So we started talking about things like the consumer journey, things that typically weren't thought of in out of home, that it was just sort of the context is where is the billboard, and that's the context. Now, smart marketers like you are thinking about the consumer journey and sort of how does that work in out of home. So because you guys are only a couple of years into out of home, can you talk about how you think about the consumer journey when you're purchasing and planning out of home?
Yeah, so it's about us building really integrated campaigns so that you're seeing us on multiple touch points. So you might see us because we did a station takeover on your train ride home, and then you open your phone and you might see a digital ad, and then you look on Hulu and you might see one of our streaming ads. So we make sure that we want to tell a relevant story so that every time you see us, you're thinking of us in a different and new way.
Do you think that's harder than doing that on other platforms, other mediums?
Yeah, I mean, it really is because we start at the very beginning thinking of a full integrated media plan. So it isn't like right now we're starting for planning for 2023. So it isn't like out of home becomes like an add-on. Like right now we're thinking about an entire marketing mix that works with our customer journey so that we can amplify our messages and making sure that we hit people on those multiple touch points.
I love that. We talk about context a lot these days. So how important is the context, sort of where and who, to Pinterest? And then which contextual environments are the most valuable to you? And when you think about context to drive interactivity, awareness, or platform usage, like, is it just awareness? Is it just, more usage? Is it down? Like, what is it that you're trying to get out of that context?
Yeah, so we're a very visual platform. So when people think of Pinterest, they might think of weddings, but there's so many things that you can see when you open the app. So we try to lean into, we'll do a really large scale billboard like in Times Square or in LA. We also think about digital as well. So how do we continue to showcase multiple use cases? Because we're seeing that most people, if you only use Pinterest for one thing, if you decide to lean into something else, we'll get you to retain on Pinterest. So maybe you came for the food, but we also want to show you the really cool sneakers that you can plan on Pinterest. Or we also want to show you the really cool haircut that you can plan on Pinterest. So for us, contextually, not only are we doing the large-scale billboards, we're also leaning into some of the digital platforms, some of the digital surfaces that we can show multiple use cases for Pinterest.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in some ways, your users are the product, right? Mm-hmm. They're the ones who create the product. So showing them on a billboard, kind of brings it to life in a real way. That's very interesting. So when you think about your target, right? So Pinterest is different to each person. So it's very hard to do something, a billboard is one to many. An out-of-home board, anything is one to many. So how do you think about the message changing based on the context, time of day, other things like that you can control?
Tell me about it. So we try to figure out what are like our core use cases because we're not going to satisfy everyone. And it's really interesting when we work with our creative agency and our media partners, we're really, really trying to match audience with use case. So we might not put something that is pretty far out, like a Gen Z buzz haircut in a place where it's mostly an industrial park. So we try to lean really deeply into who our audience is in that area and what are the things that'll resonate really deeply with them. And the great thing is, like, on our platform, we know that. So people come to Pinterest to plan, so we know a ton about what they're looking for, and we can use our own insights to match with our media plan to figure out how do we get the right use case in the right space.
I like to think, now selfishly, I think the people in this room like to think about out of home as ad intended. We use that term that we've coined. It's very chaotic in social and digital right now, to say the least. The last 60 days have made it very interesting, very difficult for brands to figure out, if you have a brand like yours that's very positive and uplifting, where can you be that's sort of a safe haven to deliver that message? We think out of home in general is a great place because it's ad intended. Do you think about, dynamically changing based on what's happening without naming or picking on other companies that may be going through some, they're hitting some potholes these days? Do you think about the dynamic media planning and making changes to things like that?
Oh, absolutely. As a media channel ourselves, we try to be the most positive place on the internet. So when we're thinking about our integrated plan, we also want to make sure that we're leaning into positive places.
We've never upset anybody. And then what does success look like? Like how are you guys measuring us? I think typically that's been an Achilles heel that we're very excited about solving that in this room. One of the Achilles heels has been not as measurable, not as precise, and we could argue that all day, but not as precise as what people perceive digital and social and other things to be. So how do you think about measurement for out of home?
Yeah, so we know that we can't directly measure if someone sees a billboard and comes to start on Pinterest or uses Pinterest, but we really lean into how are we changing sentiment? So how are we changing the way that people understand Pinterest? Comprehension is big for us. So with our out of home, we're also looking to figure out, does it make you understand Pinterest any better? Do you now know how to use Pinterest? Do you now see us as something that you can use more frequently? So sentiment is something that we measure. We also measure incremental use of the Pinterest ads, of the Pinterest platform, and we work with our media agency and also our out-of-home partners to figure out the right ways to measure that.
And how do you think about video or other pieces of creative in the media mix within out of home?
Yeah, so we're a visual platform, and we don't want people to think of us as just a crafty place or just the wedding place or just the first new home place. So we really are leaning into video to show those diverse use cases, and especially because people who come to Pinterest and lean into us really deeply, the people who we call our golden cohort, are people who come to us and they start with one thing and they end up someplace else. So you might have come for, we were talking yesterday about, you might have come to do your holiday planning, but now you see something that you really want to use for a wallpaper. And because you are doing a floral wallpaper, maybe now you want to buy a floral shirt. And because you are buying a floral shirt, maybe now you want to get a floral tattoo. So we are leaning into digital and media out of home, really so that we can continue that journey and continue that story so we can lean deeper into Pinterest.
Pinterest has always been one of the more beloved brands that, again, quasi-competitor, also a client. So, it's one of those interesting brands that everybody has good feelings about. What's next for you guys? More countries? How are you thinking about growth at Pinterest?
Yeah, so we really want to continue to tell our story. I think when people think of the social media landscape, we tend to be the underdog, even though we're the nicest player. So we really want to get the brand recognition for what people can actually do on Pinterest. And though we are a media channel, like we have our advertisers, we also do out of home for them too. It raises our profile. So when Pinterest as a brand raises, our standing as a media partner raises as well.
It's pretty interesting because we have 2 clients this year that used Pinterest feeds in their ads. So you guys, it's sort of a really complex ecosystem with the way people feel, the way other brands use you guys, work with you guys, and then translate that to out of home. So I think you get some ancillary benefits there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're talking about the Marriott partnership. So like the brands who love us, they love us and they lean in deep. So we can also do out of home partnerships as a way to extend their media plan as well.
I remember the meeting we had with them where they said, hey, can we do curated Pinterest feeds on your screens? And I said, it's okay with me if it's okay with Pinterest. So of course, we would love that. The more the merrier.
Yes, and usually those questions come to me and I always say yes. If it's a brand that we really love, we lean into it.
Good to know, and I think you guys are, you're one of the brands that other brands look to and try and emulate because of the positive feelings that consumers have. So we really appreciate you guys coming into out of home, sticking with us, working through it, helping us innovate. And I'm glad to see that you want to grow in 2023 and beyond. So I really thank you for your support in the industry.
Yeah, and thank you all. So I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're fairly new to this space, so we're continuously testing and learning what makes sense for us as a digital platform that also sells media, that also buys media. So always interested to find out, what's new and great and ways that we can all grow together.
Luxury brands, Bermuda tourism, a lot of, where you're traveling, a lot of things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I promise you, all of the brands that you work with are probably on Pinterest.
So I think we're finished right on time here, and I believe I am introducing a coffee break. So that's easy. So thank you.
Thank you.